Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, a messenger of love, leisure and quaintly lascivious 18th century erotic literature, here to talk to you today about Mercury in Libra. I actually find Mercury one of the hardest planets to talk about when discussing astrology because he is, by his very archetypal nature, very evasive, tricksterish and impossible to pin down as a representation of the fluidity and the infinity of what is also a finite mind. He is very hard to engage clearly because we always look at the mind with the mind. And so there's that element of duality there, that element of doubleness, of being able to be ourselves while simultaneously having the detachment to look at ourselves, to be both within and without our bodily machine at the same time. The mind is weird because whilst it is localized to our body as being the seat of our perception and our immediate environment, it can simultaneously travel all across the globe and through the infinity of space in a nanosecond. The mind is a restless, incessant traveler. It doesn't just stay in one place at a time like the body. It's always moving, it's always on the go, and therefore remains this almost like quantum principle of an electron that we can't quite find because we are too close to it. In the actual solar system, Mercury is very close to the Sun, which we take as a symbol of our central identity, to the point where it has only an 88-day orbit around the Sun, and is very hard to see because it's so often concealed in the heightened luminescence of the Sun's rays. So, by its nature, Mercury is so close to us that he's almost hard to see, which makes talking about him problematic because we use Mercury to talk about Mercury. So in many ways, Mercury deals with the problem of how we attempt to process infinity and digest it into something that is finite, manageable, and possible to grasp, comprehend, and communicate to others as well as ourselves. Every moment we are being bombarded with an infinite array of sensory data from our external environment, but also the constant noise and chatter of the infinite amount of thoughts that we are capable of entertaining within ourselves at any given time. So in this kind of whirlwind and maelstrom of intellectual, environmental and sensory data, as well as social data and the information we're getting from other people that are communicating to us, we need to have some kind of central organizing system that determines what is important and what isn't, that provides some kind of systemic rule book for what we pay attention to, what we process, what we decide is worth thinking about, is worth communicating, is worth sharing or perceiving in our environment, and what we are happy to censor or relegate to the garbage heap and the all-encompassing blind spot of our mind. Mercury is like the central bureaucrat in this process, but also by sign, house, and placement reveals a little bit to us about the style of our communication, the style of our thinking, the style of our perception, what we notice, how we notice, what we feel is worth saying, and how we say it, as well as the inherent bias that comes to the awareness and the attention and the capacity to listen and observe the information coming to us from other people. When we talk about the air sign Libra, one of the words that props up is often relationships. And this can tell us something about the way that Mercury in Libra processes reality and genreifies it according to its own personal bias. It is heavily dominated by its perception of relativity, the fact that nothing truly exists in isolation, but is in some way defined by its relationship to everything else around it. For instance, at the moment I am stood in this room, and that automatically gives me a relationship with the room according to the mathematical and geographical distance from me and everything else. But I am also defined by negative space, not only the space I am inhabiting, but the space I am not inhabiting as well. So therein we have this idea of duality, that there is self, but there are also things that are not self. And through perceiving the things that are not self, which are the immutable infinite other, we can then define ourselves by association. And this is true of all planets when they are in Libra. They do not exist in a vacuum. They are not consumed by their own sense of self, but they need to look outward into the world at other things, at other people, at other ideas, at other concepts, to have a better idea of where they themselves stand. So Mercury in Libra has an inherent fascination with other people's minds, not just its own, with other people's ideas, with other people's thoughts, with other people's opinions. Because by contrasting itself and its infinity of thought against other people's ideas, it can some way reduce the scope of its own down and make it more manageable. Part of this is also due to the fact that Libra has a strong concept of justice and moral order. Therefore, its thoughts are not things that have no quality or meaning of their own, but which are seen through an inherently moral, legalistic lens. Whereas Mercury in Gemini just enjoys playing along with the endlessly fluctuating stream of thoughts and enjoys just being curious for the sake of being curious, asking questions, and being more fascinated with the process of asking a question than necessarily receiving an answer. Mercury in Libra wants to come to some kind of definitive judgment or conclusion about something. It wants to be able to tame reality into some kind of intellectual order, to stop the constant toing and froing of its indecisiveness and its range of exploring infinity, and to come up with some kind of construct which makes sense of it all, which puts everything in its own place, to create a kind of feng shui of the mind through ordering it through one's awareness and relationship to it. There is an idea that thoughts aren't just thoughts by themselves, but that there are things we should be thinking and there are things we shouldn't be thinking. There are things which it is right and appropriate and truthful for us to express, and there are things which we had better left unexpressed. There are things that we should be believing, there's things we shouldn't be believing. There are decisions we should be making, and there are decisions that we shouldn't be making. So there is a kind of inherent moral tone to the thinking process. That doesn't necessarily mean that someone with Mercury in Libra is going to be religious, or necessarily someone who defines themselves into some kind of prominent socio-ideological thought system, though they very often may be, but just this inbuilt idea that there is something right they could be doing and which they could not be doing. And this creates a certain pressure on a Mercury in Libra person's self-awareness, because then that also means there's a possibility they could get things wrong. They could think the wrong thing, they could decide the wrong thing, they could believe the wrong thing, they could do the wrong thing, they could say and express the wrong thing. So in any given situation, assessing that kind of bifurcation of which fork in the road we choose is forever being presented to them. And when you feel that you could potentially make a wrong move, it places much greater pressure upon you to really pay attention to the options that are being presented to you, and to be careful and deliberate in the choices you make, so that you can hopefully always choose the path of righteousness and not the path of wrongfulness. Now, part of this inbuilt morality of consciousness also comes from the heightened social consciousness that Mercury in Libra has. It is aware that other people exist as independent or interdependent entities with thoughts, feelings, beliefs, opinions, and experiences and ways of perceiving and relating to the world that are as unique and complex as its own. Other people outside of them aren't just, non-playable characters in a video game, that they are real people with a real video game player behind them, governing their decisions and their opinions and what they are doing in the world. Other people are real. And when other people are real to you, you become much more cognizant of how your own actions, of how your own opinions, of how what you say to them will affect them. Mercury in Libra is conscious that its actions and its opinions also do not exist in a vacuum, but that the moment that it opens its mouth, the moment that it does something, it will have an effect on the environment out there, which could be good or bad. Therefore, it's going to be more careful or considered or tactical and diplomatic in choosing what it has to say. If we look at Mercury in Aries, for instance, Mercury in Aries has no problem being very blunt, very opinionated, and very to the point. It has no problem sticking its foot in its mouth. It's very conscious of what it wants as an individual and of its own desires and its own thoughts and feelings, and wants to express those loudly to other people because it finds that empowering and personally validating. To Mercury in Aries, being truthful and being honest and being forthright is more important than being obsessively neurotic and concerned about whatever you say having an adverse effect on other people. It's more concerned with being truthful and being honest with expressing its words in a powerful and individualistic way. For Mercury in Libra, it will think before it speaks. And it thinks a lot and it generally speaks a lot. But it's aware that if I say something, it will have a sociological effect on the other person. I might say something pleasant and nice, I might give them a compliment, I might be flattering and express things in a beautiful, gentle and mellifluous way, and I can see that the other people around me respond well to me, that they relax, that they see me as a beautiful, kind, considerate person, and therefore are willing to engage in the social game and offer me those same things in return. There's that sense of mutuality, that if I give out goodness and generosity and kindness and gentleness and beauty to the world, people will be more inclined to give it back. Whereas if I am rough and belligerent and aggressive and forthright to the world, people will respond to me in kind. So it's going back to that very Libran expression of Jesus of doing unto others as they would do unto you. That if you do unto others in a certain way, they will respond in kind. That there is a basic rule of reciprocity which should be governing human relations. And I say should there because air signs live in the realm of idealism, of ideality. In the mind, it is possible for things to be perfect. It is possible to conceive of a perfect way of relating to other people. It is possible to imagine a perfect system of communication in which everyone speaks in a calm, rational, reasonable, pleasant manner, and no one ever gets offended, no one ever argues, no one ever loses their temper, no one ever loses a screaming fit. Everyone is just, nice and kind and considerate and listens to one another and responds to people thoughtfully without blowing off the handle. We can imagine this world in our minds. The real world requires a lot more tact and awareness and diplomacy and carefulness, because Mercury in Libra realizes that there are people of different temperaments, there are people that you have to respond to in different ways, whereas Mercury in Aries, wanting to be itself, will just be the same with everyone. Mercury in Libra will carefully adjust and colour and calibrate itself according to whom it's speaking. It realizes that you can't just be open and authentic and real with everyone, that every relationship is different. Every relationship draws out different parts of us, but may also require the other parts of us being censored as well. There are things you can share with friend A which you can't share with friend B. There's something you could say in one situation which would earn you praise, love and admiration, and which if you said it in another could potentially get you killed. So all communication, all ideas, all concepts, all social behavior is contextual and can never be separated from that context. Now, because of this, Mercury in Libra has a very different way of sizing up a social situation than Mercury in Aries does. Mercury in Aries might just rush blazing into something and just talk openly about whatever it's thinking or feeling, regardless of who it's talking to. So long as it's being real, so long as it's being truthful, that's all that matters. For Mercury in Libra, or Mercury in the 7th house as well, when it's meeting a new person, it's kind of engaging in this calibration assessment process. It's saying, okay, I've met this new person. Well, I need to find out who they are. I need to find out about their temperaments. I need to find out about their likes and dislikes, their different quirks and qualities and peccadillos. I need to figure out which parts of me this person is going to be receptive to and respond well to, but also to be aware of parts of me that perhaps it would be best for me to hide, conceal, or turn down the volume on around this person. Being ruled by Venus, it's very concerned with maintaining social and interpersonal harmony with other people. It wants its interactions with people to be pleasant, to avoid unnecessary conflict, to avoid unnecessary drama, to make sure that both sides feel pleased and heard and respected. So in meeting this new person, it will often take on the role of the listener or the interrogator, the person who asks questions, so they can gradually mine out information about that person which helps them to build an understanding of them in their mind. And gradually, as they build up that understanding, they can begin to relax and think, okay, well, I've learned these things and I've learned these things about this person. Now I have a bit more of a better idea of what I can share and express with this person so that we can have a pleasant relationship. I can see that we have some shared beliefs and values and interests here, but I can also see that these ones are ones that could actually produce quite a lot of conflict and dissonance, where we have some serious ideological discrepancies. So for the sake of maintaining social harmony, when I am with this person, I will speak about these things which I know we share. And that way I can be guaranteed that to maximize the pleasantness and the harmony of our relationship and connection as much as possible, whilst making sure I don't bring up any of these things, which could be potential landmines or Molotov cocktails to the salubriousness of our social harmony. So you can see that there's a lot of cunning, a lot of political and social awareness and calculation that is going on behind Mercury and Libra's responses and interactions with people. And that means that people with this aspect often do succeed very well in jobs and roles that demand a very heightened awareness of delicate social interactions. They would make excellent diplomats, excellent politicians, excellent people working in front of house or more personal, sociable jobs, because they can see the natural way of keeping the peace in any situation. They have that heightened ability to see where potentially controversial or dangerous things could be, and they want to be able to prepare and limit the possibility of those things exploding in advance. But that also often creates a sense of nervousness, almost of neurosis to Mercury in Libra or the 7th house. It can sometimes be so terrified of saying the wrong thing, of doing anything that would promote a disagreement or a backlash, or bring things into an area of social disorder, that it can just be almost existing in this constant nervous, anxious, agitated state, because it can never quite relax into just being itself, because it's always having to mirror and respond to the people around it. Sometimes it can only truly relax when it's alone, and therefore no longer has to be involved in this complex social game, and can just be as rough and jagged and disruptive as it likes. And for some people with Mercury in Libra or Mercury in 7th house, that fear of doing or saying the wrong thing can become so extreme that they actually stop losing that sense of balance. Their desire to be respectful and conscious and aware and conscientious in their dealings with other people can be taken so far that they don't honour themselves in return. They don't ask for the same level of respect and accord to be given to them. They find it easier just to focus all conversations onto the other person and to avoid saying anything truly personal themselves, because if they don't do that, they can't really be hurt. It's usually only when we risk expressing a personal, vulnerable, real part of ourselves that we risk a backlash. And if we just keep everything superficial, pleasant, or focused on the other person, the chances of us being subject to someone else's judgment become that much more diminished. And this is where learning to be assertive, to speak up for themselves, to declare their own opinions in a tactful, careful, considered, and mediated way becomes a vital skill for someone with Mercury in Libra or Mercury in the 7th to develop. Say someone has done something to upset them, and probably not on purpose, just one of those everyday things. Now, if it was a Mercury in Aries responding to a perceived slight or offence by someone else, it would probably be pretty forthright about it. It would say, "Why did you do that, you bastard? That hurt me." Whereas Mercury in Libra is often upset by its capacity to be upset by someone else. Air signs are often frightened of feelings. And when something draws them into that complex realm of feelings, it becomes this big intellectual problem that they have to devote a lot of time to solve. And they think, okay, well, that person actually did something that really upset me, and I can see that I can't really just carry on amicably and peacefully in our connection without being aware that I might start acting resentfully or differently towards them, that it will shift the mood, that it will create this danger lurking underneath. I need to say something about this. And something that might not be a big deal for another Mercury can assume life and death proportions. It's now this big problem of how do I address this issue without making my response to it a big issue in its own sight. And some Mercury and Libra people can be so terrified by this that they just end up avoiding the other person, or they do just press it down and just carry on smiling and acting cheerfully and pleasantly and pretending that they haven't been bitterly wounded or hurt by the other person, because they see that as being almost the easier, less complex way than having to open the can of worms of registering a real honest-to-God disagreement with someone. But if they've developed those abilities of mediation, they'll find a way of asserting themselves in a way that is more reasonable. They'll try and express themselves in a calm manner, and a manner that sounds reasonable and logical and rational, in the hopes that the other person will realise they're not being attacked, they're not being malevolently criticised, they're just trying to say, look, I've had these issues and these difficulties based on an interaction with us, and I just wanted to address them to you in the hopes that we could work to some kind of compromise or agreement. And whilst many people do respond well to Mercury and Libra's diplomacy, we also live in a world where people, even if you come to them in the most rational, calm, pleasant manner possible, will still respond to any potential criticism with anger and outbursts. And having been on the receiving end of that behaviour can definitely make Mercury and Libra people more inclined to just not express those things completely in terms of their social interactions with people, in terms of the friendships that they have close to them. They need people who they feel they can speak their mind to freely and openly without fear of being judged. But also, close friendships with other people are also, and relationships in general, are also very important for Mercury in Libra people, because Mercury in general in air signs needs communication with other people in order to process its own thoughts. if it sits down with its own thoughts, with its own ideas, and tries to work out a decision to a problem by itself, it's likely to just keep going back and forth between the scales, to keep going from one extreme to the other without getting anywhere. It really needs to know what other people think. So when it has a problem or an issue, it needs to have those close people in its life to say, look, these are my different, complex and many-sided thoughts on this particular issue. What do you think and feel about that? And they'll go through all their friends and they'll go through the same old thing, and gradually, after they hear enough people say, well, I think you should do this and not that, if it feels right to them, if it meets that moral middle ground that they want to be upholding, then it will help them. But sometimes, even if they go to lots of other people and lots of other people tell them things they don't really like and don't really want to hear, it can still help them to see what their own thoughts are. By seeing the negative space of someone else's opinion, they can see the solidity of their own true feelings on something. Thanks to that contrast, we're back to that whole idea of relativity again. Whereas Mercury in Aries just knows how it feels and knows what it wants, the great intellectual and social awareness of Mercury in Libra and Mercury in the 7th house often means there is a proportionate lack of natural intuition that comes with that. For all of that heightened awareness of other people and a general social awareness of how to respond to other people, they lose that raw gut instinct that just tells them which way to go in a flight or fight situation. They need that deliberation process. They need to be able to share that with other people to get to the path that they are seeking. So decision making can be a big issue with Mercury and Libra in the 7th, which the anxiety of that can lead to a lot of procrastination, the hopes that if we just keep putting off a particular problem or a decision, then maybe things will resolve themselves, or maybe a decision will be made for us. Actually, sometimes one of the worst things that can happen for Mercury and Libra is for someone else to put pressure on it to make a decision, to make it feel like it's being hurried. The more it's being hurried, the more it's being pressured, the more likely it is to either make a bad decision or just to forswear making a decision completely, because it lacks that sense of rightness that it is looking for in anything that it commits to. It does need that time. But ideally, it needs friendships and relationships where it can have partners and companions who are willing to engage in its deliberations, who are willing to hear out the parliamentary session that is going on in their mind, to recognize it as important and valid, rather than something that is silly and just wasting time, which a more fiery person might be inclined to see it as. Now, that said, in order to keep things in balance, Mercury in Libra has to find a way of honouring itself and honouring its own opinions. And it often prefers to do this in a more circumnavigatory way, in a more roundabout way, in a more impersonal way. So it can say what it truly thinks and what it truly feels without appearing to do that. And many of the times it will do this by playing devil's advocate, by challenging people's thoughts and feelings without actively taking a strong stance itself, by using careful rhetoric. So maybe it meets someone and that person expresses an opinion that it dislikes or which it feels is problematic in some way. And rather than being the Mercury in Aries person who might just say, well, that's a stupid idea, you dickhead, you twat, Mercury in Libra is going to think, okay, all right, this person's engaging in some thinking here that I think is erroneous. I can see that if they actually thought differently, it might be better for them. How can I make that person see what I think it is right to think? and therefore it will play with it devil's advocate. It will test that person's ideas, it will test their logic, it will put them through all sorts of philosophical hoops, all in the hopes that it can carefully, gently and intellectually massage it into being where it wants to be, without going so far as telling that person they're wrong. It's kind of saying, okay, you see things this way, what would the world look to you if you saw things this way? Or I can see that maybe you're a bit more receptive to this idea. How can I push that door, which is ever so slightly ajar, that much wider so it can see what I'm getting at? How can I speak to you in your own language? And this is part of the other mirroring mimicry ability of Mercury and Libra, that it tends to adopt the communicative tone of whoever it's speaking to. This is what I mean where it meets someone and it carefully watches them. It'll look at someone, it'll look at their communication style and say, okay, well this person likes to communicate and express things in this way. If I want this person to feel comfortable, heard and seen, then I will respond to them in this way, even if it means adopting a whole new lingo, a whole new lexicon, a whole new rhythm and energy of speech. If this person's giving this energy, I will give it back, and that way we'll feel that much more closely and intimately together. And if a person feels like they're in the company of a like-minded individual, they're much less likely to be on guard, they're much more likely to be receptive to what the other person's saying, and therefore you can tell them things which someone who was being more belligerent and aggressive in the expression of them might cause a fight, but because you've earned that trust, because you've made them feel seen and validated and that like they're in the company of someone who is sane and matches their energy, they'll think, okay, well this person seems to be like me in a lot of other ways. Maybe I do think like they think. And so it's that classic Libran thing of, rather than just outwardly saying something, they've got to convince someone that what they are trying to get them to think was actually their old idea of along. It's carefully planting the seeds of certain thoughts in someone's mind, rather than just being straightforward and direct about it, but often having very effective results if it truly has that psychological ability. Anyway, that's all been very convoluted because Mercury in Libra is convoluted. I have Mercury in Virgo in the 7th house, so yeah, a lot here that I can relate to. My camera's about to die, so I'm going to stop this video here.